We are talking about the hot topic of the year right now, AI. It's what multiple panels here are talking about. It's what is something that has clearly dominated the news cycle for quite some time. So I want to just start out with some basics. Sarah, we've had search engines that have developed in ways that were unimaginable 20 years ago. Machine learning has been around for a while. What is distinctive about AI that explains why people are so excited and alarmed about it right now?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think one mistake people make is thinking it's just a progression of machine learning from the last decades of work on it. But in the previous era of machine learning, which Andrej Karpathy termed software 2.0, you trained neural networks from scratch with your own data against any specific task. So this could be a really sophisticated task like self-driving. But as of the last few years, with the scaling up of these large transformers models, instead, everyone can work with pre-trained foundation models for many tasks. And what this means is the 90% plus of the data management and engineering effort into building AI applications is already done for you. And as a developer, you can access it through an open source model or through an open API like Anthropic or OpenAI or many new providers. And so I think one thing that's changed is the ability for any business or any founder to access AI capabilities. And the other is that the scope of things you can do with AI is much broader when these models are more powerful.
Well, let's talk about that. Give us some specific examples of where AI is making a difference. Both of you, I believe, are AI enthusiasts, boosters. You invest in it, you actually apply it. But let's be granular.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some specific places now where this next generation of AI, these transformer-based models, are really having a big impact, either in terms of usage or revenue. Examples of that may be ChatGPT, which I think many in the audience have used. I think the state of New York banned it for educational purposes in its high schools, which means every high school student immediately adopted it. There's applications in terms of things like Midjourney, in terms of generating images and clip art and other things that people are using right now instead of having artists draw things out. There's things like Jasper, which helps you with marketing copy. So there's lots and lots of applications that are happening today that are very powerful and getting enormous usage. And then I think what's really exciting is the potential for the future in terms of really big areas of global equity or inequity, like health and education and other areas, which are finally, I think, tractable in certain ways that weren't in the prior generation of AI that just existed a few years ago.
When we talked the other day, you had mentioned a specific application in the medical field that was making a difference. Tell us about that.
Yeah, one thing that's really fascinating, and I think a lot of the place where AI is going to have the biggest impact is actually on healthcare delivery. And a lot of people are talking instead about biotech and molecules and all this stuff, which is also important. But on the healthcare delivery side, one of the big breakthroughs that happened recently is Google came out with a model called MedPalm 2. And if you actually compare the output of MedPalm 2 relative to different physician experts, it performs better than them in terms of predicting the disease you have or the course of treatment. Indeed, if you actually use medical experts to train the model gets worse, which I think was a fascinating takeaway.
All right, but are you going to get an operation based on what ChatGPT tells you should do?
Maybe in 5 years.
I don't know. The same thing. I mean, Sarah, you mentioned self-driving automobiles. I think, there is enormous understandable hesitancy anybody has about getting in a car and leaving the driving up to a machine. Everybody can understand that. Can you understand how the same hesitancy and concern would apply in many other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's been surprising is that the applications of AI in, let's say, more forgiving creative applications has happened first, right? So we're really excited about the democratization of being able to generate imagery, voice, video, like all of these assets that used to be really expensive to generate. And if you think about the risk profile of those tasks versus, let's say, self-driving or medical diagnosis is very different, right? And we need to be rational about that. I do think that some of the applications where we think of as mission-critical decision-making, there will be a very different risk framework. It will take longer for them to have impact, against patients in real life, but that doesn't mean that it's not a really big opportunity, right? So when you say, Elad or Sarah, are you gonna have a surgery based on the diagnosis? I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody in this audience has seen a doctor Google something or not know the exact, up-to-date clinical research in a particular area.
But there is human agency there.
Absolutely.
And that's the part where
and there still will be. I think a lot of this
stuff's
stuff
concerned.
I think a lot of this stuff is going to start as a tool or an assistant, right? And so the first physician tool will be an AI that helps the physician and provides information, and then the decision will be made by a physician.
Right.
And so I think in the short run, everybody's aligned in terms of how do you take this in the most responsible, thoughtful way forward, and how do you make sure that you're supporting human decision makers on really critical tasks? And that's true in healthcare, that's true in defense, that's true in all sorts of other areas. I do think that if you look back at the history of automation, I mean, there used to be elevator operators who would stand in an elevator and push the button for you and close the door.
Right.
And now when we get in an elevator, we're not worried that something's going to happen. And so, that's a obvious extreme example, but I do think things evolve as capabilities grow and as you have ways to test whether something is working well. And that's also true if you look at medical software. I started a company called Color, which is a healthcare delivery software company. And we did a lot of things in terms of automating different tests to make sure that everything that we did was with very high fidelity. And then we had humans confirm that. And I think those sorts of approaches are going to make the most sense in the near term.
Right. But we're talking about something that is potentially a lot more powerful than an elevator operator, right? Now, some months ago, I think there was, it's now up to about 33,000 people, a lot of tech executives, signed a letter calling for a pause in AI on the grounds that it could represent a profound change in the history of life on Earth. I take it neither one of you signed that letter.
I think it is going to cause a profound change in daily life. No.
Why not?
Because the letter is about existential risk, and in my opinion, lots of calls for rapid regulation of new industry are really about regulatory capture, right? And so it doesn't mean that there are not risks with any powerful new tool. Disinformation, bias, security.
Right, you mentioned a minute ago, voice, photos, videos.
Yeah.
That's exactly what alarms people, the idea that governments could use AI for disinformation. Political campaigns can use AI for disinformation, for polluting the minds of citizens with false data and information. Isn't that a legitimate cause for alarm?
Absolutely, but that already happens today in many governments around the world.
Right,
and
but
in many
AI is
non-government.
perfecting it.
AI is a tool that can be used for many different applications, good and bad, and you need to invest in the mitigations against it. I think we should sort of separate the risks that we think are very real and where we can see the applications by a government or just a bad actor, right? I am 100% sure that there are hackers out there using automations with the current generation of AI to break into valuable computer systems and hold businesses ransom. But that's actually also happened forever. These are things that we invest in mitigants against. When you think about existential risk, I'd say, my friend Andrew Ng, who many refer to as the father of deep learning and is a longtime researcher and practitioner, he asked a question that I think many people are afraid to ask, which is, I'd love to have a rational conversation about it. What is exactly the path toward existential risk from AI in any near term? It is like worrying about overpopulation on Mars, right? And so I'd say I think that
there's no population on Mars, so
exactly.
How can there be overpopulation on Mars?
Well, I think he's making a joke that we're 10 steps ahead of the progress that we'll see that will be amazing in 5 or 10 years. And I think like any tool, you're going to have a bunch of benefits that I think will dramatically outweigh the cons in this case. And I would be extremely disappointed in terms of if you think about health, education, science, all of the things that AI could have a profound impact on, where you regulate it before we really have an opportunity to see that impact.
Sarah mentioned regulatory capture, but let's look at the other end. No regulation in which anybody could have access to AI to use for all sorts of nefarious purposes. ISIS gets control of AI and uses it to develop chemical or biological weapons. The Wagner Group gets AI and uses it, it has killer robots using to kill Ukrainians. That strikes one as pretty alarming scenarios that don't seem all that unrealistic.
It's funny, if you look at the history of the 20th century, we had 2 world wars, we had large-scale genocides, we had attempted genocides, we had the Spanish-American War started by disinformation.
Right.
We had famine caused by the Great Leap Forward. That was without AI. That was just people doing terrible things to other people. So it feels like the claims that AI is somehow going to change the human dynamic for the worse is really overblown. I think fundamentally, people have always
You're talking about all the wonderful things that AI can do on the
Sure.
positive end,
Yeah.
yet you kind of dismiss the
Oh, I'm
very
not-
real dangers
Yeah,
of
yeah.
AI on the negative end.
I'm actually not dismissive at all. I think these are things that we have to approach from a responsible and thoughtful manner. But I think we can also overreact. And this has happened with every single
So how do
technology
you
wave.
prevent? How
I'll
do
give
you
you an
prevent
example. I'll give you an
ISIS from
example. I'll
getting
give you an example.
AI?
The exact same arguments were being made in the 90s about cryptography. And we said we can't export cryptography. We need to shut down cryptography. We can't have it go to third parties because of these exact same concerns. What if people could hide secrets? What if people, nefarious actors and terrorists, could do certain things? And it's the same argument every time we have a technology wave. And people get extremely worked up, and there's no tangible path that I've seen where people say, this is how a chemical weapon is going to be brought forward because of AI. Right now, if somebody wanted to, they could contract out very specific chemicals from China, which is how a lot of the drug trade actually happens, and they could produce it and use it. Like, it's not, AI is not needed for these breakthroughs in terms of these terrible things that can happen. Now, it can help augment things sometimes, and it can help defend against things sometimes. But I think people are really getting caught up in this broader narrative of, hey, there's a new technology, and we need to run screaming for the hills. It reminds me of the video game industry in the 90s. Everybody's child was going to be turned into a serial killer because of the violence in games. Those were literal articles of the 90s. So it just feels a little bit overblown in terms of that.
All right, we talk a lot about existential threats. And we all, most of us, accept that one of them is climate change. Now, some months ago, the New York Times had a front page story about the climate change impacts of Bitcoin mining because of the enormous electrical power needed to do the infinitesimal computer computations that make Bitcoin work. The same problem is for AI. The same kind of huge electrical power needed to generate all these computational the computation that makes AI work. Isn't that a climate change? Doesn't that make AI a very real climate change threat?
Yeah, I think it's important to, climate change is a topic I'm passionate about. I also think it's important to think about scale of these different problems when we look at solutions, right? Because we're all like, all right, how do we make sure that the temperature on Earth doesn't go up beyond a certain point by 2050? And you should look at the largest levers. AI is not even close to coming into contact with the top 50 levers, right? And
right now.
Yeah, yes, but my view would be unless we have a known trajectory of how this is going to be the thing that tips the needle, maybe we should fix one of the top 50 levers and focus on, carbon capture, electrification, more efficient batteries, broader use of nuclear. There are many things that we can do
Even while
to change
we're
the needle.
increasing the use of energy for AI.
So, what I would say is we're increasing the use of energy for everything, right? And AI is a use case for GPUs in data centers where those GPUs represent less than 10% of the actual population of this type of computing out there. And computing ends up a tiny portion of overall electricity use. What I'm concerned about, which I think about the levers that could most change, would be like, how can we use things like third generation nuclear instead of coal, right? This is a huge lever. And so absolutely we should figure out like efficient use of energy and clean data centers and continue to invest in these things. But one of the things I'd say, and it's not that tech companies are without fault, but their margin structure and their, I suppose, like, political position of prominence means that and their beliefs, many of these companies invest in energy efficiency in a way that lots of other companies don't.
So, one question, one headline we've seen about AI, switching to another sphere here, is AI hallucinations. It's very real. I recently interviewed Meredith Whittaker, who was the president of Signal, about, before the interview, I went on ChatGPT and said, what should I ask Meredith Whittaker of Signal? She's a critic of AI, by the way. She had been at Google, she quit in protest, and she's been an outspoken voice raising concerns about AI. I said, what should I ask Meredith Whittaker of Signal about AI? And AI spit out an answer, ChatGPT did in a second, saying, ask her about the report that Signal recently did about AI and content moderation. I asked the question, and you know what she told me? Total bullshit. We never did such a report. AI just made it up. And this is a real thing. I want to read you a quote from Simon Willison recently on a blog post. Large language models have no concept of truth. They just know how to complete a sentence in a way that's statistically probable based on their inputs and training sets, so they make things up and they state them with confidence. Doesn't sound like something we should put a lot of trust in.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you should always verify any source that you're using. I do think that technology is very early, and I think what people forget is it's been 6 months since ChatGPT launched, and 3 months since GPT-4 came out. So we're very early in this industry. A lot of people recognize hallucinations as an issue. A lot of people are working on the technology to fix it. And part of it is training, part of it is the data sets. Like, there's a lot of ways that you can actually make it dramatically better. So absolutely, there are cases where these technologies hallucinate today. Absolutely, people are working on fixing it. And in any situation, if I read an article now in a news outlet, I also go and check the primary data and I go and verify it. Like, I think in general, everybody needs to be responsible to ensure that they make sure that what is truth is actually truth.
Sarah, quick thoughts in the 10 seconds we have left on whether we should trust AI.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit like asking, would you trust the internet, right? The internet has lots of useful information for you. And in the specific instance, I was an investor in a company called Neva, which is a new search engine. Elad's an investor in a company called Perplexity. And one of the innovations that both these companies had was, we'll use AI to generate answers that are more interesting to you or to my user, and more succinct, deliver more information, do research for you, and we'll cite it. Right? And it's up to you, like, you understand sourcing better than both of us. It's up to you to decide the verity of this information. And so I don't think the burden of like figuring out what is the truth is taken away from the user because we have these new tools. I just think it's easier to get to the information.
We could go on, and I suspect the panels to come will do so, but thank both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Discussion. Yeah.